In the blood-soaked plains of 1845 Texas, a story of defiance is about to unfold. When merciless raiders descend upon a settler homestead, they believe they're claiming just another helpless orphan girl. They couldn't be more wrong. White Wolf, the most feared Comanche war chief west of the Brazos River, is about to shatter a century of tribal tradition. For 30 summers, no chief had ever taken a white bride, a law carved in stone since before the Spanish came. But when he sees her eyes in the raiders' camp, he recognizes something that transcends both their worlds. This isn't just another frontier romance. This is the story of how one chief's decision to save an enemy's child would reshape the very heart of the American West. And before I share what happens next, tell us where you're watching from, because this tale of impossible love might just remind you of your own. Dawn painted the Texas sky in shades of amber and rose as Sarah Matthews knelt before her mother's grave, fingers tracing the rough-hewn cross that marked the fresh-turned earth. The silver cross around her neck, her mother's final gift, caught the early morning light. 3 weeks had passed since the fever took her, leaving Sarah alone with her father in their remote homestead. "I'll make you proud, Mama," she whispered, tucking a wild prairie rose beneath the cross. At 16, she had already mastered the art of running a frontier household, though the weight of responsibility pressed heavy on her slender shoulders. The leather-bound Bible beside the grave was open to her mother's favorite passage, the pages worn soft from years of daily readings. Inside the cabin, coffee bubbled in the iron pot as Sarah prepared her father's breakfast. Jonathan Matthews would return soon from his dawn patrol of their property. These days, with rumors of raiders plaguing the settlements, he never let his guard down. The wooden walls of their home, hewn from frontier timber and sealed with determination, couldn't completely shut out the whispers of danger that drifted across the plains. Sarah moved through her morning routine with practiced grace. Her long, brown hair tied back with a faded blue ribbon, another remnant of her mother. The cabin's single room was neat as a pin, every surface scrubbed clean, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, filling the air with their sharp, clean scent. Her father's spare shirt hung by the fire, carefully mended the night before. Through the window, she watched the tall prairie grass ripple like waves on a golden sea. Their nearest neighbors, the Wilsons, lived half a day's ride away. Sarah missed having other young people around, but she had learned to find comfort in solitude. Her companions were the books her mother had brought from back east. Stories of romance and adventure that seemed far removed from their frontier life. The creak of leather and jingle of spurs announced her father's return. Jonathan Matthews filled the doorway, his face weathered as old saddle leather, eyes sharp as a hawk's. "All quiet on the north ridge," he reported, hanging his rifle on its pegs. "But I saw smoke signals rising from the west. Comanche, most likely." Sarah set a plate of cornbread and beans before him, worry creasing her brow. Should we ride to the fort? The question had become common these past months. As more settlers arrived and tensions with the native tribes grew, her father shook his head, reaching for the coffee. "We've worked too hard for this land to abandon it at the first sign of trouble." His eyes softened as they fell on her mother's Bible. "Your mama chose this place, saw something special here. We honor her by staying." Sarah nodded, but something cold settled in her stomach. The morning felt different somehow, the air charged like it got before a storm. Even the chickens were unusually quiet in their coop. "I'll check the root cellar stores," she said, needing to keep her hands busy. Their survival depended on careful planning, on having enough preserved food to last through lean times. Her mother had taught her that. As she descended the cellar steps, the silver cross bounced against her collarbone. The cool darkness below smelled of earth and apples, of safety and preparation. Sarah counted the jars of preserved vegetables, dried meat and beans, mentally calculating how long they could last if trouble came. A shadow passed over the cellar door above. She looked up, expecting to see her father. Instead, silence fell like a heavy blanket, broken only by the sudden terrified scream of chickens and the thunder of approaching hooves. Sarah's heart stopped at the sound of her father's voice raised. In alarm, followed by the sharp crack of his rifle, the cellar seemed to close in around her as more shots rang out above, punctuated by unfamiliar voices, shouting in a mixture of Spanish and broken English. Her hands found the wooden doll she'd played with as a child, stored away on a shelf of memories. Clutching it, she pressed herself into the darkest corner as heavy boots thundered across the cabin floor above. The trapdoor flew open, flooding. The cellar, with harsh morning light, found another one. A face appeared in the opening, weather-beaten and scarred, with eyes that glittered like chips of obsidian. Snake Eyes, they called him. The most feared raider south of the Red River. His reputation for cruelty had spread through settler communities like wildfire. Rough hands dragged her up into a world turned to chaos. The cabin's interior was ransacked. Her mother's precious books scattered and torn. Through the open door, she saw her father on his knees, blood streaming from a gash above his eye, surrounded by mounted men whose faces were masked by bandanas. "Leave her be," Jonathan Matthews growled, struggling against the men who held him. "She's just a child." Snake Eyes laughed, the sound like stones grinding together. "Old enough to fetch a good price from the right buyer." He grabbed Sarah's chin, forcing her to look at him. "Pretty thing, ain't she, boys? Them Mexico traders'll pay double for blue eyes like that." The wooden doll slipped from Sarah's grasp as she was hauled toward the waiting horses. It fell into the hearth, catching fire from the morning's embers. The flames consumed it quickly, like they consumed everything else she'd ever loved. "Papa!" she screamed as one of the raiders struck her father with his rifle butt. Jonathan crumpled to the ground, motionless. They bound her wrists with rawhide that bit into her flesh, throwing her across a saddle like a sack of grain. As they rode away, Sarah twisted to look back at the only home she'd ever known. Smoke was already rising from the cabin roof, hungry flames licking at the wooden walls. The raiders moved fast, driving their horses hard across the open prairie. Sarah's world narrowed to the rhythmic pounding of hooves, the creak of leather, and the harsh laughter of men who saw her as nothing more than merchandise. Her mother's silver cross still hung around her neck, pressing against her throat with each jolting step. Hours blurred together under the merciless Texas sun. They stopped briefly at noon, the raiders passing a waterskin among themselves, but offering none to their captive. Sarah's lips cracked and bled, her throat so dry she couldn't swallow. Still, she refused to cry, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As dusk approached, they made camp in a sheltered canyon. Snake Eyes posted guards while the others settled in for the night, passing bottles of raw whiskey. Around the fire, Sarah was tied to a scraggly mesquite tree, the rough bark pressing against her back. "First light, we head for the border," Snake Eyes announced, his words slightly slurred. 2 days' ride to my contact in Mexico. He's always looking for fresh merchandise." In the gathering darkness, Sarah felt eyes on her. Not the raiders' predatory gazes, but something else. A presence in the shadows beyond the firelight. Her mother's Bible had spoken of guardian angels. Perhaps, she thought desperately, one watched over her now. The night grew deeper and the raiders' talk turned crude. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to shut out their voices, their laughter. The silver cross seemed to grow warmer against her skin, a reminder of everything she'd lost and everything she refused to surrender. A owl's call echoed through the canyon. Once, twice, 3 times. Natural enough, except that Sarah had grown up learning the sounds of prairie wildlife. This wasn't quite right. One of the guards shifted uneasily, peering into the darkness. Something was out there. Something that made even these hardened killers nervous. Sarah felt it in the sudden tension around the fire, in the way the horses stamped restlessly at their picket lines. In the shadows beyond the canyon walls, death was watching with patient eyes. The first night among the raiders stretched. endlessly punctuated by the crackle of the dying fire and the occasional drunken laugh. Sarah's wrists were raw from the rawhide bonds, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father falling, saw their cabin erupting in flames. Snake Eyes approached her as false dawn began to pale the eastern sky. His silver-handled knife glinted as he crouched before her, the blade catching the first hint of morning light. It was a beautiful weapon, she thought distantly. Spanish craftsmanship, evident in the intricate scrollwork on its handle. Hungry? He held up a piece of dried meat just out of reach. Might be willing to share if you're friendly enough. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. Sarah turned her face away, earning a harsh laugh from her captor. Proud little thing, ain't you? That'll change. They all change eventually. A commotion from the guard post interrupted whatever he'd planned next. Riders coming. At least a dozen from the north. Snake Eyes cursed, grabbing Sarah roughly and cutting her bonds. Mount up, we ride now. He practically threw her onto his horse, swinging up behind her. The raiders broke camp with practiced efficiency, scattering the evidence of their presence. They rode hard through the early morning, the thunder of pursuing hooves growing steadily closer. Sarah caught glimpses of their pursuers through the dust, mounted men moving with fluid grace, their horses seemingly part of their own bodies. Comanches, she realized, her heart racing. The raiders' fear was palpable now, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of genuine warriors. Split up, Snake Eyes ordered, wheeling his horse toward a narrow canyon. Meet at the old mission. 3 raiders peeled off with them, while the others scattered in different directions, trying to confuse their pursuers. The canyon walls rose steep and high, morning shadows making it impossible to see what waited ahead. Sarah's silver cross bounced against her throat with each jolting stride. A war cry echoed off the stone walls, high, ululating, raising the hair on the back of her neck. Snake Eyes spurred his horse harder, but the animal was already lathered and blowing. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. An arrow whispered, "A past," striking one of their companions from his saddle. Another found its mark in Snake Eyes' shoulder, drawing a pained curse from the raider chief. They burst out of the canyon into open country, but their hunters were waiting. A line of mounted warriors blocked their path, war paint stark against brown skin, weapons ready. At their center sat a figure that drew Sarah's eye like a lodestone, tall, powerful, with an eagle feather war bonnet trailing down his back. Unlike the others, he carried no weapon. He didn't need one. Authority radiated from him like heat. From a flame. This, she knew without being told, was White Wolf. Snake Eyes jerked his horse to a halt, nearly unseating them both. His remaining men clustered around him, guns drawn but hands shaking. They all knew the stories. No one escaped White Wolf once he chose to hunt them. The Comanche chief's dark eyes met Sarah's for a long moment. Something passed between them. Something she couldn't name but felt in her bones. Then his gaze shifted to Snake Eyes, and the temperature seemed to drop despite the morning sun. "The girl," White Wolf said in perfect English, his voice deep and measured. "Give her to me, and you may live to see another sunrise." Snake Eyes' laugh held an edge of hysteria. "This one's spoken for. Got a buyer waiting in Mexico who'll pay her weight in silver." His knife pressed against Sarah's ribs, the ornate blade, no longer beautiful, but deadly. "Back off, or she bleeds." White Wolf didn't move, didn't change expression, but something shifted in the air. The raiders' horses sensed it, dancing nervously beneath their riders. Sarah felt it too. The calm. Before a storm breaks, the moment before lightning strikes, you choose death then, White Wolf said softly. He raised one hand, and the world exploded into motion. White Wolf watched the scene unfold with the patience of a hunter who had tracked countless prey. His warriors held position, reading his subtle hand signals with the familiarity born of years of raids and battles. The morning sun caught the eagle feathers of his war bonnet, casting shifting shadows across the ground below. He had been tracking the raiders for 2 days, following their trail of destruction across Comanche hunting grounds. Such men were like coyotes, taking what they could, destroying what they couldn't carry. But this time was different. When his scouts reported they'd taken a captive, something stirred in his spirit. The old medicine woman had spoken of a vision, a white dove among wolves, whose fate would change the people's path. Now, seeing the girl's quiet defiance, even with a knife at her ribs, White Wolf understood. There was steel beneath her fear, strength behind those blue eyes that reminded him of the summer sky. She held herself like a warrior, though she couldn't know it yet. Snake Eye's knife trembled slightly against her side. The raider chief was wounded, losing blood from the arrow in his shoulder, but wounded predators were the most dangerous. His remaining men looked to him with increasing desperation, knowing they were trapped but too afraid of their leader to surrender. White Wolf's second-in-command, Running Deer, edged his horse closer. "The sun grows higher, War Chief. If we wait too long, more raiders may come." But White Wolf held his position, reading the subtle shifts in the tableau before him. The girl's fingers were working at something around her neck, a silver cross that caught the light. Her eyes met his again, and he saw the question in them. Understanding passed between them without words. "Your men are dead on their feet," White Wolf said to Snake Eyes, his voice carrying across the space between them. "Your horses are spent. Night comes, and you have nowhere to run." As he spoke, warriors materialized from the brush behind the raiders, having crept into position while he kept their attention. Snake Eye's head jerked around at the sound of bowstrings being drawn, his face twisting with rage and fear. "Last. A chance?" White Wolf continued. "Release her and—" The girl moved then, driving her elbow back into Snake Eye's wounded shoulder. The raider chief howled in pain, his knife slashing wildly. But she was already rolling from the saddle, hitting the ground hard and rolling away. White Wolf's warriors loosed their arrows in perfect unison. 2 raiders fell before they could raise their guns. Snake Eyes fought to control his rearing horse, with one hand raising his ornate knife with the other. The blade flashed as he threw it at the fleeing girl. White Wolf was already moving. His horse, trained for battle since birth, responded to the slightest pressure of his knees. He swept past the girl, snatching her up onto his saddle even as the knife whistled through the space where she had been. The battle erupted in earnest then. Raiders fired wildly, their shots going wide as Comanche warriors closed in from all sides. Snake Eyes wheeled his horse, trying to break through the circle, but Running Deer's arrow took him in the chest. He toppled from his saddle, the silver handle of his knife glinting uselessly in the dirt beside him. In moments, it was over. The morning air filled with the smoke of spent gunpowder and the groans of the dying. White Wolf felt the girl trembling against him, her breath coming in, short gasps. The silver cross she wore had left a small crescent-shaped cut on her neck when she fell. "You are safe now," he said quietly, wrapping his buffalo robe around her shoulders. "No one will harm you while you are under my protection." She looked up at him, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "My father. They killed my father." White Wolf nodded gravely. "We will honor his spirit, and you will find a new path among my people." He touched the eagle feather that hung beside his face, a symbol of his authority as war chief. "I give you my word." Around them, his warriors were gathering the raiders' weapons and horses, preparing for the journey back to their camp. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of dawn. A new day was beginning for all of them. Thunder rolled across the prairie as White Wolf led his warriors and their rescued captive toward the safety of Comanche territory. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm that would wash away their tracks. Sarah sat before him on his horse, wrapped in his buffalo robe, her body gradually relaxing as the miles stretched between them and the raiders' camp. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as White Wolf raised his hand, signaling a halt. "We rest here," he commanded in Comanche. then switched to English for Sarah's benefit. The horses need water, and there is shelter ahead. They made camp beneath a limestone overhang, the warriors moving with practiced efficiency. Running Deer approached, carrying something that glinted in the gathering darkness. "Found this on the snake's body," he said, holding out a smooth, pale stone set in silver, a moonstone amulet. "The old ones say such stones hold power." White Wolf took the amulet, studying it before turning to Sarah. "Among my people, we believe. Certain objects choose their owners. This has chosen you." He held it out to her, watching as she hesitantly accepted the gift. "Why did you save me?" she asked, her fingers tracing the stone's smooth surface. "Your people and mine. We're supposed to be enemies." Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face as he considered her question. "The wind told me of your coming. The medicine woman saw you in her dreams. Some things are written in the stars long before we understand them." A cry went up from the perimeter, more riders approaching through the storm. White Wolf's warriors melted into defensive positions as he pulled Sarah deeper into the shelter of the rocks. "Raiders," he whispered. "They followed despite the rain." Through the curtain of water they could make out mounted figures moving like shadows. A voice carried over the thunder. "We know you have the girl, White Wolf. The Mexican traders will pay double their original offer. We can split the profit." Sarah's hand found White Wolf's arm, her grip tight. "There are more of them than before," she whispered. He nodded grimly. "But they cannot see in the dark as we do." He pressed something into her hands, a small pouch made of soft deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork. "Medicine bundle," he explained. "For protection, stay here." The battle erupted like the storm above, swift, violent, and chaotic. Arrows flew through the rain as raiders tried to breach their position. White Wolf moved like a spirit through the darkness, his warriors striking and vanishing before the enemy could respond. Sarah clutched the medicine bundle, her heart pounding. A raider broke through, charging toward her hiding place. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen warrior's bow, knocked an arrow as she'd seen her father do countless times, and loosed it. The raider tumbled from his horse, more surprised than hurt, but it was enough. White Wolf appeared beside her, pride glinting in his eyes. "You have a warrior's spirit," he said, helping her to her feet. "But we must move, now." They ran through the storm, rain washing away the blood and dirt of battle. The moonstone amulet bounced against Sarah's chest beside her silver cross, as White Wolf led her to where fresh horses waited. Behind them, war cries and gunshots echoed off the canyon walls. "Hold tight," he ordered, swinging them both onto a paint stallion. They rode hard through the darkness, lightning illuminating their path in bright flashes. Sarah found herself moving with the horse's rhythm, trusting White Wolf's guidance as they navigated terrain that would have been impossible in daylight. The storm grew fiercer, but they pushed on. Sarah felt something changing inside her with each mile they covered, fear giving way to exhilaration, uncertainty transforming into trust. When White Wolf's arm tightened around her waist to steady her through a particularly rough stretch, she leaned back into his strength without hesitation. Dawn was breaking as they finally slowed, the storm spent. They'd lost their pursuers hours ago, aided by the rain and darkness. Sarah was exhausted but alert, every sense heightened by the night's events. She could feel White Wolf's heartbeat against her back, strong and steady. "Look," he said softly, pointing to where the sunrise painted the sky in brilliant colors. "A new day begins. Yesterday's shadows cannot touch you now." The moonstone amulet seemed to warm against her skin, a reminder that she was no longer the same girl who had knelt at her mother's grave just days ago. Something wild and free had awakened in her spirit, something that resonated with the power of the storm they'd just ridden through. White Wolf's camp lay ahead, smoke from morning fires, rising into the clear air. Sarah straightened her spine, ready to face whatever waited. She was done being afraid. The Comanche camp sprawled across the valley like a living thing, dozens of teepees rising from the earth in orderly rows. Smoke from morning fires drifted skyward, as women moved about their daily tasks and children played between the lodges. Warriors stood guard at strategic points, their presence both protective and imposing. As White Wolf led their party into camp, all activity ceased. Hundreds of eyes turned to study Sarah, some curious, others hostile. A elaborately decorated, ceremonial blanket hung outside the largest teepee, the war chief's lodge, its intricate patterns telling stories Sarah couldn't yet read. They fear change, White Wolf said quietly, helping her dismount. But they also respect strength. Show no fear, even if you feel it. An elderly woman emerged from the war chief's teepee, her face deeply lined, but her eyes sharp as obsidian. She wore a dress adorned with elk teeth that clicked softly as she moved, and her silver-streaked hair was braided with strips of red cloth. This was Singing Bird, the medicine woman whose visions had foretold Sarah's coming. "So," Singing Bird said, in accented English, "the wind has brought us a pale flower." She circled Sarah slowly, studying her with unnerving intensity. "But not so fragile as she appears, I think. There is fire in this one." A group of young women gathered nearby, whispering among themselves. One stepped forward, tall and proud, with defiance in her stance. "Why does the war chief bring a white girl to our camp?" she demanded in Comanche. "Has he forgotten the raids on our hunting grounds? The broken treaties?" "Peace, Dancing Fawn," Singing Bird reprimanded. "The spirits have their own wisdom, which is not for us to question." She turned to Sarah, switching back to English. "You will stay in my lodge until your own is prepared. Come." Inside the medicine woman's tipi, the air was thick with the smoke of sacred herbs. Bundles of dried plants hung from the support poles, and a small fire burned in the central pit. Singing Bird gestured for Sarah to sit on a pile of soft buffalo robes. "The people do not trust easily," she said, beginning to prepare a tea from various dried leaves. "Too much blood has been spilled between our worlds. But White Wolf sees something in you, something that could help heal these wounds." Sarah touched the moonstone amulet at her throat. "I don't understand any of this. Yesterday I was a settler's daughter, and now you are between worlds," Singing Bird finished, handing her a cup of steaming tea. "Neither fully one thing nor another. Such positions can be powerful if you have the courage to embrace them." Outside, they could hear the camp returning to its normal rhythms. Women's voices called to each other, children laughed, horses nickered, the sounds of a life completely foreign to everything Sarah had known. "You will learn our ways," Singing Bird continued, "how to dress, how to move, how to speak. Some will resist your presence like Dancing Fawn. Others will help you if you show them respect. But most importantly," she fixed Sarah with a penetrating stare, "you must learn to see with new eyes. The world is larger than the settlers. Stories would have you believe." A commotion arose outside, voices raised in excitement. Singing Bird pushed aside the teepee flap to reveal White Wolf returning with a hunting party, several fresh-killed buffalo being prepared for butchering. The entire camp mobilized to help, even the children having specific tasks to perform. "Watch," Singing Bird instructed. "Everything teaches if you pay attention. This is how we survive, not as separate families, but as one people." Sarah observed the efficient workflow, the way each person knew their role without being told. It was so different from the individualistic lifestyle of the settlers, yet she could see the strength in it. As she watched, White Wolf looked up and met her eyes. Even across the distance, something sparked between them, a recognition, a possibility. "The war chief has never taken a wife," Singing Bird said quietly, noting the exchange. "Many have hoped to catch his eye, but his heart has waited. Perhaps it waited for you." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "But I don't know anything." "About being Comanche," the old woman smiled. "You will learn, and in learning you will teach us also. This is the way of balance." She began sorting herbs with practiced hands. "Now help me prepare these medicines. Your first lesson begins." Days flowed into one another like water in a stream as Sarah began to find her place among the people. Each morning brought new lessons, some gentle, others harsh, all necessary. She learned to dress in the Comanche way, soft buckskin, replacing her torn settler's dress. The women showed her how to braid her hair with strips of leather, though she kept her mother's silver cross hidden beneath her clothing. Dancing Fawn's hostility hadn't diminished, but it had taken on a different character. She watched Sarah's attempts to learn their ways with critical eyes, quick to point out every mistake. "Your stitches are crooked," she'd say in Comanche, knowing Sarah was struggling to learn the language. A child could do better, but Sarah persevered, remembering singing birds' words about strength. She worked until her fingers bled, learning to prepare hides and make pemmican. She practiced the language at every opportunity, slowly building her vocabulary. A small beaded bracelet, given to her by one of the grandmothers, marked her first small victory of acceptance. White Wolf watched her progress from a distance, his duties as war chief keeping him occupied with tribal matters. Yet Sarah often felt his eyes on her, especially during the evening gatherings when stories were told around the fires. Sometimes their gazes would meet across the flames, and the world would seem to hold its breath. "The war chief asks about you," Running Deer told her one afternoon as she practiced with a bow. Her aim was improving, though she had far to go. "He wants to know if you are adapting well." Sarah loosed an arrow, watching it strike closer to the target. "Why doesn't he ask me himself?" Running Deer smiled. "Our ways are not like settler ways. Some things must follow the proper path, or they lose their meaning." He adjusted her stance slightly. "Try again." That evening, as Sarah helped prepare the evening meal, she found herself working alongside White Wolf's sister, Morning Star. The woman's quick fingers plaited sinew into rope as she spoke. "My brother is a great war chief, but he knows little of matters of the heart. He watches you when you're not looking, like a wolf watching the moon." Sarah's hands stilled on the corn she was grinding. "I don't know how to be what everyone expects. Dancing Fawn reminds me daily that I'm an outsider." "Dancing Fawn wanted my brother for herself," Morning Star said matter-of-factly. "But more than that, she fears change. The people have lost much to the settlers. Every year our hunting grounds shrink. Some say taking you in will make us weak." "And what do you say?" Morning Star studied her thoughtfully. "I say strength comes in many forms. You stopped running and faced the raiders. You learn our ways without losing yourself. Perhaps you are exactly what the people need. A bridge between worlds." Later that night, as Sarah walked back to her teepee, White Wolf stepped out of the shadows. He wore no war paint, no symbols of his authority, just a man, not a chief. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They moved beyond the circle of lodges to where the horses grazed in the starlight. Sarah's heart beat faster, aware of his presence beside her, of the power contained in his silence. Finally, he spoke. "When I first saw you in the raiders' camp, I thought the spirits had sent me a sign. Now I wonder if they sent me something more." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "You are changing my people, Sarah Matthews. Some fear this change, others welcome it." "And you?" she asked, barely breathing. He reached out, touching the spot where he knew her silver cross lay hidden. "I see both worlds in you, the strength of your people and the wisdom of ours. Like this silver cross and the moonstone amulet, different, but both sacred in their own way." Sarah caught his hand, holding it against her heart. "I'm trying to understand, to find my place here." "Your place." He stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "Perhaps your place is wherever you choose it to be." The moment stretched between them, fragile as a spider's web. Then a wolf howled in the distance, breaking the spell. White Wolf stepped back, but his eyes held a promise that made Sarah's breath catch. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will teach you to ride properly." A war chief's woman must be able to ride as well as any warrior. He left her there beneath the stars, her heart pounding and her skin tingling where he had touched her. The beaded bracelet on her wrist caught the starlight, a symbol of how far she had come and how far she had yet to go. The sun had not yet risen when Singing Bird woke Sarah, pressing a small medicine pouch into her hands. "Today you learn the sacred ways," the old woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some knowledge can only be shared in the space between night and day." They walked beyond the sleeping camp, climbing a gentle rise where ancient stones formed a rough circle. Morning mist clung to the ground like spirits reluctant to return to the earth. Singing Bird lit a bundle of sage, using an eagle feather to wash them both in its cleansing smoke. "Your people have their own medicine," she said, touching Sarah's. "Silver cross. Their own way of speaking to the Great Spirit. But there are older voices in this land, voices that whispered to the people long before the settlers came." Sarah watched as the medicine woman began laying out items from her pouch. Different herbs, stones, and small carved tokens. Each one, she explained, held its own power, its own story. Like the strands of a web, all things are connected. Pull one thread and the whole web trembles. "Dancing Fawn says I'll never understand the sacred ways," Sarah admitted, watching. As Singing Bird's weathered hands moved with practiced grace, the old woman smiled. "Dancing Fawn sees with young eyes. She thinks understanding must come from blood alone." She pressed a sprig of sweetgrass into Sarah's palm. "But the spirits choose their own messengers. They care nothing for the color of one's skin." As the sun began to paint the eastern sky, Singing Bird taught Sarah the proper ways to gather and prepare sacred herbs, the prayers that must be spoken, the respect that must be shown. "These are not simple medicines for the body," she explained. "They heal the spirit, bridge the gap between worlds." Sarah's fingers traced the patterns on a small ceremonial rattle. "When I was little, my mother used to read to me from her Bible. She said faith could move mountains." "Ah," Singing Bird nodded, "then you already understand more than you know. Faith is faith, whether it speaks in English or Comanche." She began mixing herbs in a stone bowl, grinding them with practiced motions. "White Wolf sees this in you, the ability to stand in both worlds without being torn apart." The mention of the war chief made Sarah's heart flutter. Singing Bird noticed, her dark eyes twinkling. "He comes to me often, asking about your progress. No war chief has ever shown such interest in a student's medicine lessons." Sarah blushed, remembering the touch of his hand beneath the stars. "I don't know if I'm ready for what everyone seems to expect." "Ready?" Singing Bird laughed softly. "Was the earth ready for the first rain? Was the eagle ready for its first flight?" She pressed her palm against Sarah's chest, above her heart. "Trust what you feel here. The heart knows things the mind cannot understand." They worked through the morning, Singing Bird teaching Sarah the sacred songs that must be sung while preparing medicines. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist, but in their stone circle, time seemed to move differently. "There will be those who oppose your place among us," Singing Bird said as they packed away their medicines. "They fear what they cannot understand. But remember this, every great change in the people's history has come through those who dared to walk new paths." She pulled something from her medicine bag, a small pouch of soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns Sarah now recognized as healing symbols. "This is for you, your own medicine bag. Fill it with what speaks to your spirit, whether it comes from your old world or your new one." Sarah accepted the gift with trembling hands, feeling the weight of trust it represented. "Thank you, grandmother." Singing Bird touched her cheek gently. "You have a strong spirit, child, strong enough to bear the changes that are coming. Remember, medicine is not just in the herbs and stones. It is in the space between heartbeats, in the silence between words, in the love that bridges worlds." As they walked back to camp, Sarah felt different, as if something had shifted inside her, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. The morning's lesson had been about more than just medicines. It had been about finding her place in this new world, about understanding that some bridges were meant to be built. Sarah found White Wolf at dawn, standing before a warrior's shield that hung outside his lodge. The shield's surface was covered with intricate paintings, scenes of battles, spirit animals, and symbols of power. But it was the central image that caught her eye. A white wolf standing guard over a fallen warrior. "My father's shield." "White," Wolf said quietly, noting her interest. "He fell defending our hunting grounds from Mexican soldiers 10 summers ago." His fingers traced the painted wolf. "He gave me my name, saying I would one day protect our people as the wolf protects its pack." Sarah moved closer, drawn by the rare vulnerability in his voice. "Tell me about him." White Wolf was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. "He was a great chief, but a better father. He taught me that true strength lies not in how many enemies you kill, but in how many of your people you keep alive." He turned to her. "Your father, he was a brave man. I saw it in how he faced the raiders." Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. "He taught me to be strong, too, after my mother died." She touched her silver cross. "He said grief can either break you or forge you into something stronger." "Your mother, what took her?" "Fever. 3 weeks before the raiders came." Sarah's voice caught. "She made me promise to keep reading her Bible, to remember the stories she taught me, but the raiders burned it with everything else." White Wolf's hand found hers, warm and calloused. "Some things cannot be burned. The stories live in your heart, as my father's teachings live in mine." A commotion from the edge of camp interrupted them, scouts riding in hard, their faces grim. White Wolf straightened, the vulnerable moment passing as the war chief's mask slipped back into place, running deer dismounted in a cloud of dust. "Mexican soldiers," he reported in Comanche, 3 days' ride south. "They're moving up the river, burning everything in their path." Sarah felt White Wolf's hand tighten on hers before he let go. "How many?" "At least 50. Well armed. Running." Deer's eyes flicked to Sarah. "They're led by Colonel Santiago, the one who killed your father." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken pain. Sarah could feel the tension radiating from White Wolf's body, see the old grief warring with fresh rage in his eyes. Without thinking, she touched his arm, offering what comfort she could. He covered her hand with his own, drawing strength from the contact. "Gather the war council," he ordered. "We must prepare." Throughout the day, warriors came and went from the council lodge. Sarah helped the women prepare extra arrows and medicine bundles, her hands working automatically while her mind churned with worry. The thought of White Wolf facing his father's killer made her heart ache. As dusk approached, she found him again by his father's shield. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly, "that this is your chance for vengeance." "Not vengeance," he corrected. "Justice. Santiago has killed many of our people, burned our lodges, stolen our horses. He must be stopped." "Then let me help." The words surprised them both. "I know settler ways, how they think, how they fight. Let me be useful." White Wolf studied her for a long moment. It would not be safe. Neither was facing the raiders. Neither was leaving everything. "I knew to come here." She straightened her spine. "Your father taught you to protect your people. Well, these are my people now, too." Something shifted in his expression. Pride, perhaps, or admiration. He reached out, touching her cheek with infinite gentleness. "You have become more than I ever dreamed possible, Sarah Matthews." The sound of her name on his lips sent shivers down her spine. They stood there in the gathering darkness, the painted shield bearing witness to a moment of perfect understanding between them. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we plan our strategy together." The war council gathered at first light, the tribe's most respected warriors assembling in the central lodge. Sarah sat beside White Wolf, acutely aware of the glances cast her way, some curious, others disapproving. Dancing Fawn stood among her brothers, her face a mask of barely contained fury. A ceremonial spear, its shaft adorned with eagle feathers and sacred symbols, lay before the council. White Wolf had explained its significance. Only those who held it could speak, ensuring that all voices were heard with respect. The Mexican soldiers approached from the south, White Wolf began, his voice carrying authority. They burn and kill without honor. We must stop them before they reach our hunting grounds. Running Deer picked up the spear. Our scouts report they follow the river. We could ambush them in the narrow canyon pass. But before the discussion could continue, Dancing Fawn stepped forward, claiming the spear with fierce determination. "How can we trust our war plans to settler ears?" she demanded in Comanche. "This white girl sits in our council while her people ally with our enemies." Sarah understood enough now to follow Dancing Fawn's words. The woman switched to accented English, making sure Sarah missed nothing. "My father died fighting settlers. My mother died when they poisoned our water. And now we let one of them into our most sacred discussions." White Wolf's face hardened. Sarah has proven herself loyal to the people. Has she? Dancing Fawn's laugh was bitter. Or has she bewitched our war chief with her pale beauty, making him forget his duty, his pride? She planted the ceremonial spear before her. "I challenge her right to be here. Let her prove herself in the old way, by combat." A murmur ran through the council. Such challenges were rarely made, but they were bound by tradition to honor them. White Wolf started to object, but Sarah touched his arm, silencing him. "I accept," she said in careful Comanche, her pronunciation clear and deliberate. She rose, facing Dancing Fawn. "Name your terms." Dancing Fawn's eyes glittered. "Hand-to-hand combat. No weapons. At sunset." She smiled coldly. "Unless you fear facing me without your war chief's protection." Sarah held her gaze. "I'll be there." The council dissolved into chaos, warriors taking sides in heated discussions. White Wolf pulled Sarah aside, his face troubled. "You don't have to do this." "As war chief, I can—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "Dancing Fawn is right about one thing. I need to prove myself, not hide behind your authority." She straightened her spine. "Will you teach me what I need to know?" His eyes searched hers before he nodded slowly. "Come with me." They spent the hours until sunset in intensive training. White Wolf showed her Comanche wrestling techniques, ways to use an opponent's strength against them. Running Deer joined them, demonstrating moves he'd seen. Dancing Fawn used in previous contests. "She will expect you to be weak," he advised. "Use that expectation against her." As the sun began its descent, the tribe gathered in a wide circle. Dancing Fawn waited, dressed only in leather leggings and a simple shirt, her hair tightly braided. Sarah matched her dress, the moonstone amulet and silver cross her only ornaments. Singing Bird blessed the circle with burning sage, then stepped back. "This challenge will end when one surrenders or can no longer fight," she announced. "There will be no killing blows, no permanent damage. The spirits watch and judge." Dancing Fawn circled Sarah like a mountain cat, testing for weakness. "Your kind took everything from us," she spat. "Our lands, our buffalo, our children. And now you try to take our war chief's heart?" She struck like lightning, but Sarah was ready. Using White Wolf's teachings, she redirected Dancing Fawn's momentum, sending her stumbling. The crowd murmured in surprise. What followed was a brutal dance of attack and defense. Dancing Fawn had years of experience, but Sarah had desperation and determination. They grappled in the dust, each gaining and losing advantage. Blood ran from Sarah's split lip, and Dancing Fawn's eye was swelling shut. Both women were gasping for breath, covered in sweat and dirt. Then Dancing Fawn made a crucial mistake. She glanced at White Wolf, hatred flashing in her eyes. Sarah seized the moment. Using every lesson she'd learned, surviving the raiders and living among the Comanche, she took Dancing Fawn down, pinning her in a hold Running Deer had taught her mere hours before. "Yield," Sarah panted in Comanche. "Please, this fight is not helping the people." Dancing Fawn struggled, but the hold was secure. "Why?" she demanded. "Why do you stay?" "Because this is my home now," Sarah answered. "My family, my future. I'll fight for it just as fiercely as you." Something shifted in Dancing Fawn's expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps understanding. She slapped the ground twice, the traditional signal of surrender. Sarah helped her up as the crowd erupted. In cheers and calls, White Wolf stepped forward, pride evident in his bearing, but it was Singing Bird who spoke first. "The spirits have witnessed," she declared. "Sarah Matthews has proven her place among the people. Let no one challenge it again." Dawn found Sarah by the river, washing the dust and dried blood from her victory the night before. Her muscles ached from the fight with Dancing Fawn, but she felt different, stronger, more certain of her place. The bruises were badges of belonging, earned through courage rather than birth. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. White Wolf stood at the river's edge, holding something in his hands, a half-finished wedding blanket, its intricate patterns telling a story of two worlds meeting. Sarah's heart skipped at the significance of such a gift. "My mother began this before she died," he said quietly, running his fingers over the weaving. "She said it would be for the woman who could bridge two worlds." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I never understood what she meant, until now." Sarah stood, water droplets catching the early light like diamonds on her skin. "Your people have lost so much because of mine. How can we bridge such a divide?" White Wolf stepped closer, the blanket cradled between them. "The same way you won. Yesterday, with courage, with understanding, with an open heart." His free hand came up to touch her cheek, fingers tracing a bruise from Dancing Fawn's fist. "You fought not just for yourself, but for the people. Even Dancing Fawn must respect that." "She fought well," Sarah admitted. "I understand her anger better now. The pain of loss." She touched her silver cross, thinking of her own parents. "Loss shapes us," White Wolf agreed, "but it need not define us." He set the blanket aside, taking both her hands in his. "My father taught me that a chief must put his people first. For years, I thought that meant rejecting anything from the settler world. But watching you these past weeks, learning our ways while holding true to your own spirit, I've seen another path." Sarah's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "What path?" "One where we learn from each other, where we take the best of both worlds and build something new." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "The Mexican soldiers come, bringing death. But here, in this moment, I see life, hope." He reached into his shirt, pulling out a small object that glinted in the morning light. Sarah gasped. It was her mother's silver cross, the one she thought lost in the battle with the raiders. "I found this when we rescued you," he explained. "Kept it safe, waiting for the right moment." He pressed it into her hand. "Your God and our spirits. Perhaps they are not so different. Perhaps they led us to each other for a reason." Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she clutched the precious memento. "I thought it was lost forever. Like you, it survived, grew stronger." White Wolf's hand cupped her face. "Sarah Matthews, you came to us as a captive, but you have become so much more. You are a warrior, a healer, a bridge between worlds." His voice deepened. "And if you choose, you could be my wife." The morning seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its morning song. Sarah looked into White Wolf's eyes, seeing not just the fierce war chief, but the man who had saved her, taught her, respected her strength even as he protected her. "I choose you," she whispered. "I choose our people, our future." He kissed her. Then, gentle as summer rain and fierce as a prairie storm, the silver cross pressed between their hearts, a symbol of worlds colliding and reforming into something new and beautiful. When they finally parted, White Wolf pressed his forehead to hers. "There will be hard times ahead. The soldiers come. Some of our people still doubt, but together," Sarah finished, "we are stronger. Like the desert blooms after rain, something beautiful can grow from the hardest ground." He smiled, touching the moonstone amulet that hung beside her recovered cross. Two medicines, working as one. Come, there is something I must teach you before we face what's coming. Hand in hand, they walked to where his horse waited. The morning sun painted the world in shades of promise, and for the first time since the raiders had destroyed her old life, Sarah felt truly, completely whole. The war drum's deep boom shattered the afternoon peace, its urgent rhythm calling warriors to arms. Sarah looked up from where she and Morningstar had been preparing healing medicines, her hands freezing on the herbs. One beat, then two quick ones, the signal for approaching enemies. White Wolf burst from the council lodge, his face grim. "Raiders," he announced, riding with the Mexican soldiers, many more than before. His eyes met Sarah's, conveying silent urgency. They had known this day would come, but not so soon. Running Deer galloped into camp, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Santiago leads them," he reported, and with him, he hesitated, glancing at Sarah. "Snake Eyes lives. The wound that should have killed him only made him stronger. He wears your silver knife in his belt, War Chief, like a trophy." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She remembered Snake Eye's cruel eyes, his taste for violence. That he had survived their last encounter seemed like a dark omen. "How many?" White Wolf demanded. 50 Mexican soldiers, 20 raiders. They have cannon." Running Deer's words caused a stir among the gathered warriors. The people had faced guns before, but cannon were different. They follow the river, burning everything. In their path, the Hawk Band's camps are already ash. White Wolf's hand found the war drum, its surface decorated with symbols of power and protection. "Then we face them before they reach our people." His voice carried across the camp. "Warriors, prepare for battle." The camp erupted into organized chaos. Women gathered children and began dismantling teepees, ready to move to safer ground if needed. Warriors painted their faces and horses, singing their death songs. Through it all, the war drum kept its steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the tribe itself. Sarah worked quickly, packing essential medicines into rawhide bags. She had learned much from Singing Bird, which herbs stopped bleeding, which fought infection, which gave strength to the wounded. But would it be enough? "Your place is with the women and children," White Wolf said, approaching as she worked. "In the caves to the north?" "No." Sarah straightened, meeting his gaze. "My place is here. I can fight. You've trained me yourself. And if there are wounded—" He touched her face, his fingers leaving traces of war paint on her skin. "The raiders will be hunting you especially. Snake Eyes does not forget his prey. Let him come." She touched the moonstone amulet at her throat, then her mother's silver cross. "I'm not the same girl he captured. I'm Comanche now, too." Pride and worry warred in White Wolf's expression. Finally, he nodded. "Then you will need this." He handed her a small medicine bundle, different from the others. "My father carried it into his last battle. It holds powerful protection magic." Sarah accepted it with trembling hands, understanding the honor he did her. Around them, warriors mounted up, their faces transformed by war paint into fierce masks. Dancing Fawn rode past, nodding briefly to Sarah. Not friendship exactly, but recognition of a shared purpose. "They think to find us weak," White Wolf addressed his warriors in Comanche. "Divided. They think the people will break before their cannon and their numbers." His voice rose. "They are wrong. We are the lords of the plains. We are the people of the wind, and today we show them what it means to wake the wolf." The warriors roared their approval, weapons raised to the sky. Sarah mounted her own horse, the medicine bundle secure against her heart. She had come so far from that terrified girl in the root cellar, had found strength she never knew she possessed. White Wolf wheeled his horse beside hers. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "know that you have made me proud. You have shown the people a new way." "We will show them more than that," she replied in Comanche. "We will show them that love is stronger than hate, that bridges are stronger than walls." He smiled fiercely. "Then let us teach them together." Raising his voice, he called out, "To battle!" The war drum's rhythm changed, becoming faster, more urgent. As they rode out, Sarah looked back at the camp one last time. Singing Bird stood watching them go, smoke from her medicine pipe rising like prayers into the evening sky. The old woman raised her hand in blessing, her eyes full of knowing. Whatever came next would change everything. For better or worse, there would be no going back. The setting sun painted the clouds blood red as the warriors of the people rode to meet their destiny. The canyon walls echoed with the thunder of hooves as White Wolf led his warriors into position. Sarah crouched behind a boulder with Dancing Fawn and other archers, watching the Mexican soldiers advance below. The morning sun caught the brass of their cannon, making it gleam like a serpent's eye. Colonel Santiago rode at their head, his uniform pristine despite the dust. Behind him, Snake Eyes and his raiders moved like shadows, their faces hard with anticipation. The silver knife that had once been White Wolf's glinted at Snake Eyes' belt, a deliberate insult that made Sarah's blood boil. "Remember," Dancing Fawn whispered in Comanche, "wait for the signal." Her previous hostility had been replaced by focused determination. They were all warriors now, united against a common enemy. White Wolf had planned the ambush carefully, using Sarah's knowledge of military tactics and his own understanding of the land. The canyon narrowed ahead, forcing the soldiers to bunch together, perfect ground for what was to come. The war cry, when it came, shook the very stones. Warriors erupted from hidden positions, arrows blackening the sky. Sarah loosed her own bow, remembering everything White Wolf had taught her. Her arrow found its mark in a raider's chest, the first life she had ever taken. There was no time to dwell on it. "The cannon!" Santiago's voice carried clearly. "Bring up the cannon!" But the heavy weapon was already stuck, its wheels mired in the mud White Wolf's warriors had created by damming and releasing a small stream. The soldiers struggled to move it as mounted warriors swept past, their arrows precise and deadly. Sarah saw Snake Eyes break away from the chaos, leading a group of raiders up a hidden trail. They were trying to flank the archer's position. "Dancing Fawn!" she called out. "Above!" The two women led their group to intercept the raiders, moving through the rocks with practiced stealth. Sarah's heart pounded, but her hands were steady. This was what she had trained for, what she had become. The fight, when it came, was brutal and close. Sarah found herself face to face with Snake Eyes, his cruel smile unchanged. "Should have killed you when I had the chance," he snarled, drawing. "White Wolf's stolen knife." "You should have," she agreed, falling into the fighting stance White Wolf had taught her. The medicine bundle pressed against her heart, giving her strength. Snake Eyes lunged, blade flashing. Sarah moved like water, like wind, using his momentum against him, as she had in her fight with Dancing Fawn. The knife sliced air where she had been. Below, the battle raged. White Wolf's warriors had the soldiers surrounded, their superior numbers meaningless in the narrow canyon. Santiago was shouting orders, trying to reform his lines, but the chaos was complete. A war cry rang out, Dancing Fawn taking down 2 raiders with lethal precision. She fought her way toward Sarah, understanding without words that Snake Eyes was the greater threat. "You fight like them now," Snake Eyes spat, circling Sarah warily. "Think that makes you one of them?" "I fight for my people," Sarah replied in Comanche, making him snarl in rage. He charged again, but this time she was ready. Dancing Fawn's leg sweep took him by surprise, and Sarah's blow sent the knife spinning from his grasp. Lightning split the sky, a storm approaching fast. Wind whipped through the canyon as Snake Eyes scrambled for the knife. Sarah reached it first, the familiar weight settling into her palm like it had been waiting for her. "This belongs to the people," she said, backing him toward the canyon's edge. Thunder rolled overhead, and the first heavy drops began to fall. Snake Eyes laughed, a horrible, broken sound. You think this changes anything? There will always be more of us, more soldiers, more raiders. The people's time is ending. No, Sarah replied. The people are changing, growing stronger, but you won't be there to see it. She reversed the knife, offering it handle first to Dancing Fawn. This kill is yours, sister, for your family. Dancing Fawn's eyes widened at the gesture, understanding its significance. She took the knife as Santiago's voice rang out below. Retreat! Fall back! The storm broke in earnest as the soldiers fled, leaving their cannon mired in mud. White Wolf's warriors pursued, ensuring they would not threaten the people again. Sarah watched Dancing Fawn deliver justice to Snake Eyes, then turned to survey the battlefield. A victory necklace hung from a fallen warrior's neck, crafted from the teeth of his first buffalo kill, meant to bring strength in battle. She retrieved it carefully, honoring his sacrifice. The people would sing songs of this day, of how they had stood together against both old enemies and new. White Wolf found her as the rain began to ease, his war paint streaked, but his eyes bright with triumph. Santiago escaped, he reported, but without his army, without his cannon, he will not return. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. And the people? The people are strong, he replied, touching the victory necklace in her hands. Stronger together than apart. He looked at Dancing Fawn, who approached with his father's knife. You fought well, both of you. Dancing Fawn presented the knife with formal dignity. Your woman proved herself a true warrior today, she said in Comanche. The stories will remember her name. 3 days after the battle, a rider approached the Comanche camp carrying a white flag. Sarah recognized him, Thomas Wilson, her former neighbor, looking older than she remembered. He carried a letter from the territorial governor offering peace talks in the wake of Santiago's defeat. Sarah Matthews. Thomas's eyes widened when she stepped forward, dressed in a ceremonial dress that blended Comanche beadwork with settler style. Ikats, we thought you were dead, or worse. I found my path, she replied simply, standing beside White Wolf as he read the governor's letter. The choice ahead had been building since the moment White Wolf had rescued her, but now it demanded an answer. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Your father's sister in St. Louis. She'd take you in. There's still a place for you among your own people. My own people? Sarah touched the moonstone amulet that had become as much a part of her as her mother's silver cross. Look around. You, Thomas. These are my people now. White Wolf finished reading, his face unreadable. The governor offers peace, he translated for his warriors, and recognition of our hunting grounds. In exchange, we must send a representative to live among the settlers, someone who understands both worlds. The implications hung heavy in the air. Sarah felt the weight of every eye in camp upon her. The warrior society who had accepted her, the women who had taught her their ways, the children who had stopped seeing her pale skin as strange. Dancing Fawn stepped forward, her voice carrying. She has proven herself in battle, learned our medicines, spoken our tongue. But this choice must be hers alone. Singing Bird emerged from her lodge, carrying a special dress she had been working on in secret. Its design was unique. Traditional Comanche patterns worked into a style that incorporated elements of Sarah's heritage. The people stand at a crossroads, the old woman said. We can remain apart and eventually fade, or we can learn to walk in both worlds while keeping our spirits strong. Sarah took the dress, feeling the prayers and hopes worked into every stitch. And if I choose to be this bridge between worlds, then you choose a hard path, Singing Bird replied. The settlers will see you as changed, no longer fully theirs. Some among the people will always question. You must be strong enough to stand between, to help both sides see the way forward. Thomas cleared his throat. Sarah, think carefully. Once you make this choice, I made my choice the day White Wolf saved me, she interrupted. Everything since then has only made it clearer. She turned to the war chief, switching to Comanche. If you'll have me, I choose our people. I choose to be the bridge they need." White Wolf's face softened with pride and love. "You honor us with your choice," he addressed the gathered tribe. "The world changes whether we wish it or not, but change can make us stronger if we face it with wisdom and courage." Singing Bird raised her hands in blessing. "The spirits have shown us this path. Through this union, the people will survive and grow strong in new ways." One by one, the tribal leaders stepped forward to acknowledge Sarah's choice. Even those who had once doubted her saw the truth now. She was neither fully settler nor fully Comanche, but something new, something necessary. Thomas watched it all with wonder and a touch of sadness. "I'll tell the governor you'll be his representative," he said finally, "though I don't think this is what he expected." Sarah smiled. "Tell him that the future belongs to those brave enough to build bridges, not walls. Tell him I'll help forge a lasting peace, but I do it as one of the people." As Thomas rode away, Sarah entered Singing Bird's lodge to change into her new dress. The old woman helped her with the complex fastenings, murmuring prayers and blessings. "You understand what you're choosing?" Singing Bird asked softly. "The path will not be easy." Sarah touched her mother's cross, then the moonstone amulet. "I understand. But love is worth any price, and hope is stronger than fear." When she emerged, wearing the dress that symbolized her unique place between worlds, White Wolf was waiting. His eyes held the future she had chosen, one of challenges and possibilities, of two worlds learning to coexist through understanding and respect. The choice was made, the bridge was built, and in the end it was as natural as breathing. Dawn painted the meeting grounds in shades of gold as Sarah stood beside White Wolf, watching the approaching delegation. Colonel Santiago rode at its head, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of barely concealed contempt. The peace talks had been his commander's idea, not his. Sarah wore her ceremonial dress, but beneath it was hardened leather armor. A pair of matched tomahawks, wedding gifts from running deer, hung at her belt. She had learned never to trust Santiago's kind of peace. "The woman stands with them," Santiago spat in Spanish to his aide. "Has she gone completely native?" Sarah answered in the same language, her voice carrying clearly. "I stand where I choose." "Colonel, as do we all." The Mexican officer's face darkened at being understood. He dismounted stiffly, still favoring the wound from their last encounter. 20 soldiers accompanied him, hands never far from their weapons, despite the white flag of truce. White Wolf stepped forward, every inch the war chief. "You come seeking peace?" His English was clear and deliberate. "Or do you bring more death to our lands?" "Peace," Santiago replied through gritted teeth, "by order of my superiors, though what peace can there be with savages who steal white women?" Sarah's hand found her tomahawk. "I wasn't stolen, Colonel. I was saved. Saved from raiders who worked for you." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Santiago's hand moved to his sword, and warriors tensed on both sides. The peace talks balanced on a knife's edge. "Lies," Santiago snarled. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Sarah nodded to Running Deer, who brought forward a figure in chains, one of Snake Eyes' surviving raiders, captured in the canyon battle. The man's face was bruised, but his eyes burned with hatred. "Tell them," Sarah commanded in Spanish. "Tell them who paid you to raid settler farms, who bought the captives you took." The raider spat at Santiago's feet. "Why deny it? He paid us well, said taking slaves would drive the settlers away, weaken the Comanche hunting grounds." Santiago's sword cleared its scabbard with a metallic hiss. "You dare bring this filth to a peace talk?" His blade pointed at Sarah's heart. "You're nothing but a race traitor, His words cut off as Sarah's tomahawk struck his sword hand, sending the weapon spinning. Her second axe pressed against his throat before his men could react. "I am Sarah of the people," she said quietly, deadly, "daughter of two worlds, and wife to their greatest war chief. The only filth here is a man who would use raiders to murder innocent families. Warriors materialized from hiding places around the meeting ground, arrows nocked. Santiago's men found themselves surrounded, their usual numerical advantage reversed. "Kill me," Santiago growled, "and there will be war." "No," White Wolf stepped forward. "There will be justice." He produced a letter, the one Sarah had found, among Snake Eye's possessions, detailing payments and arrangements in Santiago's own hand. "Your commanders will see this. They will know what kind of man led their soldiers." Santiago's face went pale. "You would not dare?" "The choice is yours." Sarah pressed the tomahawk slightly harder. "Face trial for your crimes, or die here. Either way, your power to hurt the people ends today." For a long moment, only the wind spoke. Then Santiago's shoulders slumped. "I yield," he said bitterly. "Take me to the authorities." Sarah lowered her weapon. Wise choice. She switched to Comanche, addressing the warriors. "Bind him. We ride for the fort at dawn." As Santiago was led away, White Wolf touched her arm. In his other hand, he held the matched tomahawks, their edges stained with victory. "You fought with both wisdom and courage," he said proudly. "Truly a warrior of the people." Sarah cleaned her weapons carefully, feeling the weight of what had just happened. "Will there be peace now?" "A different kind of peace," he replied. "One built on strength and understanding, not fear." He smiled. "You have shown them that the people can adapt without breaking, that we can embrace new ways while keeping our spirits strong." Around them, warriors began to celebrate, their war cries carrying news of victory across the plains. Dancing Fawn approached, respect clear in her bearing. "The spirits chose well," she said simply. "You are truly one of us now." Sarah looked at the rising sun, feeling its warmth on her face. The path ahead would not be easy, but she was ready. Her warrior's heart beat strong and sure, carrying the rhythm of two worlds united. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the prairie grass rippling like golden waves under the early sun. Sarah stood in Singing Bird's lodge as the old woman helped her prepare. Her wedding crown was unique, a blend of Comanche beadwork and settler craftsmanship, representing the bridge she had become. "The people have never seen a ceremony like this," Singing Bird said, adjusting the crown's intricate decorations. "But then, we have never had a bride like you." The dress Sarah wore combined both worlds, buckskin and cotton, beadwork and lace, all flowing together in perfect harmony. Her mother's silver cross hung alongside her moonstone amulet, no longer in conflict, but in balance. Outside, the camp buzzed with preparation. Warriors and settlers mingled cautiously, but peacefully. Thomas Wilson had returned with other neighboring families, bearing witness to this unprecedented union. Even Dancing Fawn helped coordinate, ensuring both cultures' traditions were respected. "Your mother would be proud," Thomas said when he saw her emerge. "She always said love could bridge any divide." Sarah touched her cross, fighting tears. "She taught me that, and now I understand it better than ever." White Wolf waited at the ceremony ground, resplendent in his chief's regalia. His face softened when he saw her, love and pride shining in his eyes. Behind him stood tribal elders and settler witnesses, gathered to see two worlds join as one. Singing Bird began the ceremony in Comanche, burning sacred herbs and calling on the spirits for blessing. Then Thomas stepped forward, reading from a Bible he'd brought, the same passages Sarah's mother had loved. "Two streams conjoin to make a mighty river," Singing Bird proclaimed in both languages. "Two cultures conjoin to make a stronger people." White Wolf took Sarah's hands in his. "I take you as my wife," he said in English, then repeated in Comanche. "Before both your God and our spirits, I pledge my heart and strength to you." Sarah's voice was clear and strong as she responded. "I take you as my husband, my chief, my heart. Before God and the spirits, I pledge myself to you and to our people." They exchanged gifts, Sarah giving White Wolf a silver band she'd had Thomas bring from the settlement, White Wolf giving her a magnificent ceremonial blanket that told their story in symbols and beadwork. "Let all witness," Singing Bird declared, "that these two are now one. Let their union be a symbol of the peace and understanding we build together." The celebration that followed was like none the prairie had ever seen. Comanche drums mixed with settler fiddles, creating new rhythms. Children from both communities played together, while elders shared stories, finding common ground in their love of the land. Dancing Fawn approached the newly married couple, bearing a peace pipe decorated with symbols of both cultures. "The people are changing," she said, offering it first to Sarah. "But perhaps this is how we grow stronger." Sarah took a ceremonial puff, then passed it to White Wolf. "Not changing," she corrected gently. "Growing, learning, building something new while honoring what came before." As the sun set, casting long shadows across the prairie, White Wolf led Sarah to their new lodge. The entrance flap bore a unique design, a white wolf and a dove, surrounded by symbols of both their peoples. "Welcome home," he said softly, taking her hand. Sarah looked at the life they had built, the future they would forge together. "Home," she agreed, "in both worlds and between them, where I was always meant to be." The stars emerged above the prairie, witnessing the birth of something new, not the end of two separate paths, but the beginning of one shared journey into tomorrow. 5 summers after Sarah and White Wolf's wedding, the plains had changed in ways few could have imagined. There, camp had become a meeting place where settlers and Comanche gathered to trade, negotiate, and learn from one another. A peace pipe, its surface carved with symbols of both peoples, held a place of honor in the council lodge, a testament to the bridges they had built. Sarah sat outside their teepee, teaching a group of children, both settler and Comanche, the stories of both cultures. Her belly was swollen with their second child. Their first, a daughter named Morning Light, played nearby with Dancing Fawn's son. The former rivals had become close friends, their children representing the future they had fought to create. "Tell us again about the raiders," one of the settler boys begged. "About how you became Comanche." Sarah smiled, touching the silver cross that still hung beside her moonstone amulet. "It's not just my story," she said. "It's the story of all of us, of how two peoples learned to see with new eyes." White Wolf appeared on horseback, returning from a successful hunt. Time had added a few strands of silver to his hair, but his bearing was as proud as ever. The children scattered excitedly as he dismounted, calling him Chief in both English and Comanche. "The buffalo herds are strong this year," he reported, helping Sarah to her feet. "The new hunting agreements work well. Both our peoples will have plenty." They walked together to the edge of camp, where they could see for miles across the prairie. To the east, a small settlement was growing. Not a fort or a threat, but a place where their peoples could meet and trade. Thomas Wilson had helped establish it, ensuring the settlers who came understood and respected the new way of things. Singing Bird's vision was true, Sarah mused, leaning against her husband, about a bridge between worlds. White Wolf nodded. "She sees our daughter continuing your work. Morning Light dreams in both languages, rides like a Comanche, but reads from your mother's Bible stories. She is the future we fought for." A group of riders approached, a mixed party of settlers and warriors, returning from a joint patrol of their shared hunting grounds. They moved together with easy familiarity, proving that old hatreds could be unlearned. "There will always be those who resist change," Sarah acknowledged, thinking of Santiago, who had faced justice for his crimes. "But we've shown them a better way." Dancing Fawn joined them, her own child on her hip. "The old ones say the people are growing soft," she said, "but I see differently. We are growing wise, learning to bend instead of break." The sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a sound that no longer meant danger to the settlers, but rather reminded them of the chief who had shown them a new path. Sarah felt her unborn child kick and smiled. This baby would be born into a world different from the one she had known, a world where bridges replaced barriers, where understanding conquered fear. The silver cross and moonstone amulet caught the last rays of sunlight, no longer symbols of division but of harmony. "Come," White Wolf said softly. "The council fire is being lit. There are stories to be told, songs to be sung." They walked back, together, past teepees and cabins that stood side by side, past children who played together without seeing differences, past elders who had learned to share their wisdom across cultural bounds. The peace pipe would be passed, prayers would be offered to both God and the spirits, and the future would grow stronger with each shared breath. Sarah paused at the entrance to the council lodge, remembering the terrified girl she had been, the woman she had become. "Two streams joining to form a mighty river," she quoted Singing Bird's words from their wedding day. White Wolf squeezed her hand. "And the river flows on," he finished, "carrying all of us into tomorrow." The council fire blazed up toward the emerging stars, its light illuminating faces of all colors gathered in peace. Sarah took her place beside her husband, ready to continue their work of building bridges, of proving that love could indeed conquer any divide. The night was warm, the future was bright, and the story of the orphan girl and her Comanche chief had become legend, a tale of hope passed down through generations, proving that the greatest journeys often begin with the hardest choices.